Very few things frustrate me more as a reader than reading pointless dialogue and, pointless scenes for that matter. It's basically where the author is just putting in some random conversation in the middle of the story to kind of beef up their word count or, some filler text. If your dialogue doesn't do one of two things, if it doesn't drive the plot forward in some meaningful way or reveal some key piece of information about a character, then I would strongly suggest omitting it completely. I think what a lot of writers do is, I think writing dialogue is, relatively easy. It's easier than writing kind of the prose. And so what they do is they use dialogue as a crutch, almost like a filler. So they'll have some pointless conversation just to kind of beef up their word count. And this is really going to turn off the readers. I hate it. If I see a book that does it, I will put it down immediately. I know it's very tempting to do this, to kind of, use it as filler, but you have to resist the temptation to do this. So behind me are, some of the books that I've written. I'm just going to select them at random. We'll grab, let's say, The Art of the Hustle, which is my first book. We'll grab, let's say, I Am Rome, which is my last book. And we'll grab, let's say, Prodigy. Now, I'm just going to flip randomly and read the dialogue on the page, and I will kind of tell you why it's relevant and what purpose it is there. So this is saying, okay, she was messing with you. Well, not exactly. I didn't introduce myself by first and last name. I told her my name is Alex. Well, okay, so this part is kind of a spoiler. I don't want to use this one, but that is very relevant. So let's just flip to this chapter. It's not really a dialogue on that page. Okay, so I don't know. Try it again. Alex scanned her thumb, blah, blah, blah. Now what do we do? There might be another way. So here they're kind of like hacking into something. It's kind of some back and forth dialogue. It's important to the plot, right? I Am Rome. Flip to a random page. Let's see. There's not really that much dialogue on this page. Where are you? Mr. Smith asked. I am Rome. I'm a visitor to your planet. I mean you no harm. What do you want? I'm here to help humankind. Blah, blah, blah. So it's, meaningful information. He's telling you what you want to do, or what he wants to do. Art of the Hustle. Flipping to a random page, opening it up. Not much dialogue on that page. Okay, Trevor, you have a phone call, Judy yelled out from upstairs. Hello? Hi, Trevor, this is Mark Andrews. I'm the manager, blah, blah, blah. So here is a conversation about Trevor getting a big break. So that's actually really relevant to the plot. As you can see, I just flipped to random pages and read random dialogue from my books. They're all very meaningful. I could show you examples from books that you could read cover to cover, and it's not obvious why there's certain conversations or entire chapters or entire sections of the book that are even there. I read it and go, what's the point of this? So another important lesson with writing dialogue is, sometimes you want to be very natural. It's very good to have natural sounding dialogue. But there is a kind of balance to it, right? In normal speech, we kind of stumble over our words. We say or yeah, we stutter, right? And sometimes we go off on tangents or we misspeak, we use the wrong word. Generally speaking, in writing, we don't tend to write that way. We don't tend to write dialogue that way. Unless it's integral to the plot. So if somebody has a stutter or they're nervous or they're guilty of something, then maybe it become relevant. But generally you want to omit those things. Keeping with that vein though, sometimes when you write an essay or an email to somebody, you tend to write very formally. So I've written example. So the example I have is, yes, there will be plenty of people at the party, so feel free to join us. You are more than welcome to bring a guest. It is my last day in town. That is something that you might expect in an email or, somewhere else, but generally people don't talk that way, right? So I've revised that sentence to say, yeah, of course, I want you to come to my party. It's my last day in town. You should definitely come, and feel free to bring someone. What's up with that girl you're seeing? Bring her. So That's a much more natural way of speaking. You can see that I've done a few things. I've kind of conjugated a lot of the sentence or the words. So instead of it is or there will be, put it's or there'll, or instead of they are, put there. The second thing is using slang is much more preferable because that's kind of the way people talk, right? So instead of yes, there is a party at 8, say yeah, of course there's a party at 8. So people tend to say yeah than yes in speech. And the last thing I did with that is I made it more personal. Instead of saying feel free to bring a guest, it's like, yeah, bring someone. What about that girl that you were seeing? So it's a little bit more personal, and you feel the two people talking are connected in some way. So another important lesson when you're writing dialogue, people tend to, greet each other with, hey, how's it going? Good. How's the family? Oh, thanks. Thanks for asking. I'm fine. How about you? There's these pleasantries that start conversations generally, and also conversations end that way. Okay, well, it's nice chatting with you. Yeah, see you again. See you later. Generally in writing, you don't need to, you can omit those parts. You can just kind of get to the important stuff. Either the reader is going to assume that they exchanged pleasantries, or you can just say the two exchanged pleasantries and then you got into kind of the meat of the conversation. And, sometimes earlier in my career, I was struggling with this because I didn't know this lesson. I had to kind of read other authors and see what they do. But so I would have like a phone call, for instance, where the person would answer, hello, is so-and-so there? Yes, this is so-and-so. Okay, it's this person. So it'd go back and forth, and it was like super boring. So I just say, he phoned them, and then it's like, yeah, kind of, what do you want? And then they got into the meat of the conversation, and then you just end it with the most interesting part of the conversation, if it's relevant to do so. Another thing that I tend to do myself, and I see in other writing, is you tend to start a lot of conversations with well. It's like, how are you doing? Well, I was good until such and such happened. Well, blah, blah, blah. It seems like a very natural way to start a sentence. And I often have to catch myself that I'm doing it. I'm not even aware that I do it. So what I'll do is I'll just write. If I catch it in the moment, I'll fix it. But often what I'll have to do is go back and use, Control H or Control F to find every instance where I used the word well at the beginning of a sentence, and I delete like 90% of them. And most of the time it doesn't really impact the story or the dialogue that much. It's actually, we don't even need that word, but so that's a little trick that I use. Some other tricks that I use is I read my dialogue aloud. When you read it aloud, you can kind of hear it for what it is, and you can kind of see it sounds natural or unnatural when you read it, or you can get somebody else to read it for you or read it with you. I also use a program called Final Draft. And so Final Draft, I just plug in my I don't write in Final Draft, but I write in Word and then I import it into Final Draft. And then there's a function where it can just read you the text. So I'll just do that for all the dialogue. Actually, I'll do that for everything, but specifically for the dialogue. And I'll just sit there and listen to it. And I can totally pick up on things that sound unnatural or clumsy or awkward. And that's one way I fix it. Another trick that I use is to use placeholder text. So sometimes when I'm writing dialogue, I kind of get the general idea of what I want these two characters to talk about, but maybe I don't have the mental space to figure out the intricacies of the conversation, or maybe I'm bored with that conversation. I don't want to deal with it, or I really want to get to another part. So I'll just use placeholder text. I'll say, TK wants to meet later, TK responds aggressively or whatever. It's enough information for me to kind of come back to it. And the reason I use the letters TK is because those two letters tend not to come up in any other word. So I can just do, control find and find every instance of TK, and I'll find all my placeholders throughout the text. And then, I'll go back and I'll write the dialogue later. And the third trick that I do is a term or a phrase that I call embodying the character, which might sound a little bit weird. And I have an entire video on embodying the character. And what this basically means is I don't just write dialogue for the sake of writing dialogue. I actually create elaborate character profiles and backstories that nobody's ever going to see but me. So I kind of figure out some of their motivations and some of their goals, how they speak, where they come from, and if they have any particular, slang that's particular from that region, or some mannerisms or a way of speaking. And when it's much like an actor who, is preparing for a role. I get in the heads of the character and I have a conversation in my head back and forth, so I can actually figure out what that person would say in that moment, or, what their response would be. So this is really has to do with character profiling and spending like a ton of work beforehand, but it makes writing dialogue way easier if you know the person. Like, you probably know, your family members, your friends, and if somebody told you they'd say something, you go, oh, my friend, I can't picture them saying that. They would never say that, or they would never do that. Or you might say something like, oh yeah, that's totally so-and-so. I could totally picture them saying that. That's because you know them so well. Well, I try to know my characters so well that I can kind of jump back and forth between two characters and figure out who's saying what and, how they're responding. Okay, so this next piece of advice, I should preface that, I'm by no means an expert on writing. I do a lot of, writing tip videos, but this is just this is my opinion, right? I don't know, you do whatever you want. But I have written about a dozen books and, been writing for over 10 years, been reading fiction for even longer. So, take my opinion for what it's worth. I generally don't like opening chapters with dialogue, especially chapter 1. There's a concept that kind of comes up in movies or TV shows, and I've talked about it in other videos, where it's kind of, you go from big to small. So you create some sort of establishing shot, and then you go in a little bit narrower, and then you go in a little bit narrower. So if you open up your story with some dialogue, the reader's not there yet. They don't either know the character, they don't know what's at stake, they don't know why this conversation is relevant, they don't know who they're talking to, they don't know this character. So that conversation is kind of meaningless, and they don't know the broader context. What year is it in? What does the world look like? What city are you in? What are you guys even talking about? So that's why, for me, I don't like opening chapter 1 with dialogue. I think I have done it in some of my books, but so anyway, I break that rule. But generally speaking, what I like to do is I start big. I start with an establishing shot, like the world is this way, and then these people are in this scene, and then this is the dialogue that's happening. So it's kind of like, I call it big to small. There are some instances where I start, chapter 2 or 3 or some other chapter with dialogue, but that's rare. And generally it's because the previous chapter ended with dialogue or something like that. I try to be even cautious about doing that. And lastly, what I'll say is, when you close a chapter with dialogue, you generally don't need the response. It's often much more powerful to just pick some kind of cliffhanger point in the conversation and end it there. So if a character is saying like, yeah, we need to meet at 8 o'clock to rob the old lady, you don't need the other person saying, okay, or, oh, sure, I'll meet you there. Closing a chapter with sure or yeah, okay isn't that interesting, but closing it with let's rob that lady is very interesting. You want to know about the robbery, and so the next chapter kind of makes you flip the page. So there it is, some of my opinions on dialogue. And so if you agree with me, or if you have any different tricks, or you disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I'm always happy to learn new things or to discuss my opinions further. If you liked the video, please hit the like button. If you want to hear more videos where I talk about writing, please hit the subscribe button, and I will see you next time.